So some of the fundamentals of art, and I mentioned as we start drawing, we're dealing with abstraction. I like to point out that some of you may want to take notes. The things you're going to deal with are, what do you call that? A line. And some may call it actually a horizontal line. Yeah, because it's very different than a vertical or a diagonal line. And this is how I start playing with lines. Oh, wait a minute. Because if I do a combination of 2 vertical and 2 horizontal lines, all of a sudden now I have a shape. Okay, so I have lines and I have shapes when I combine those lines. So I have a combination of lines. Oh, wait a minute. There's another type of line that I forgot about. It's a curve. And if I take just a little bit further, that curved line, it also becomes a shape. Now it's a circle. And what can you do with combinations of diagonal lines? Well, triangles. Always going back to this elemental, very basic, simplistic way of thinking. This is all you need to know. These, from lines, actually I can go even a little bit further to just a dot. And I could do several little points. And when I put these points together, very, very close to each other, just like that, and I would have to zoom in, but these are a bunch of little dots put together. That's actually what makes a line. And then line makes the shape, and then shape very easily, just by doing variations of those simple elements, can become forms. So this, what I'm trying to prove here is, with these very simple basic elements, and I'm just dealing with line, shape, and form, I could begin to create more lines here. And now this is a different type of line. It's a little bit thicker, but as I put it together, I begin to create an illusion. And that's all we're dealing with, illusions. I could do the same to this. As I add just one line here, all of a sudden you were seeing a flat circle, but just by adding a few lines, it can actually place it in space. So line, shape, form, obviously I'm dealing with light and space. It becomes more and more and more complex. One that's really we're going to deal with a lot today is going to be texture. So remember, it's again, in this case, dashes of somewhat kind of dot lines. We call those dashes, and that creates a texture. Very different from, let's say, this one. This is going to give me sort of a, and I can make it furrier, so I can make it, you know, kind of same. I'm thinking of hair here. I was thinking of flowy hair coming out of that rectangle, but I can make it fluffier. So I'm beginning to use line to create the illusion of texture here. So one element at a time, we begin to add more and more and more complexity. The idea today is going to be simplifying these complexities to very simple, those very simple elements. We didn't even deal with color yet. So just to name them, we're dealing with line, shape, form, value. That's this. When I have light, meat, and dark, we summarize that as value. So you have value changes. Texture, color, and space. You're going to deal with all of these when you're dealing with art. Somehow they're going to be part of your work. So for example, let me explain one here that comes into play very often. I have a square here, and when I do this, all of a sudden I've created space. just by adding the element of juxtaposition. Because you cannot, I mean, you can actually, kids tell you this, think that this is not in front of this, that this is behind the shape that I'm putting in front. This first one, I'm going to go ahead and just divide it into 4. Just like that. And here is, I'm going to bring back that, I'm going to be dancing and everybody's going to be looking at me. And sometimes you feel silly when you're dancing and everyone's looking at you and you're the only one. But if you love dancing and you kind of feel confident, it's not like knowing how to dance. You just feel the music. And you don't worry about anything else that's going on except that movement. That's what we're going to be doing here. In a way, you're going to be doing that prejudgment. Oh my gosh, what am I going to do? Well, the first one's going to be easy. I'm just going to ask you to do geometric shapes. I'm going to simplify it even more. Circle. So I want you to dance with circles. Now, choosing your medium. I'm going to do one first here with just colored pencil, and I'm going to switch over to a brush or something else. And these are just ways of warming up, kind of getting into the rhythm of what we want to do later on, with searching for that vocabulary, searching for those elements that are going to get you more in the direction of, oh, this is where I kind of want to go. This feels right for me. So I could do that, and I could play with just, I'm going to start with kind of a thick, big circle in the middle. I know I saw that early one, inspiration, that I brought those images. There's a movement in the 20th century, the surrealists are the ones that used it the most, which is called psychic automatism. Now, the translation of that, how it would work, would be word association. When someone says a word and you think of something, and it almost becomes sort of an unconscious thing. What we want to do here is get rid of your conscious mind. You want to get to a place where you're not thinking anything at all. You're just letting the subconscious, almost like your dream state, flowing onto the paper. Now this, wow, what is he talking about? It only happens when you begin to move your hand and not overthinking about what you're doing. So all I'm going to be thinking about is circle, edges, line, overlap, thickness of line. At some point, I want my mind to kind of be in a very quiet, I know it's difficult with me talking in your ear, but I'm doing this as a guide just to see where it goes. And kind of simplifying. I know I'm supposed to be geometric, but I want to add a little bit of gesture to it. I feel it. Maybe a little bit of value. And in a way, it's kind of, if you've ever doodled without thinking, when you were doing something else, you're doodling when you were on the phone, and then you look at that page and like, oh my gosh, when did this happen? And look at all that stuff that just showed up on the paper. When you really, really allow it, your subconscious is going to guide you. There's so much information in there, your personal history, feelings. The ideal is going to be that showing up. Personal experiences, feelings of your interaction with reality, with nature. And I could get carried away. I'm going to have to move a little bit faster because see, I just caught myself. I'm getting lost in there. And I could see something happening out of, coming out of this. So I'm going to go to number 2 here. And I'm going to just use a little bit of acrylic paint and water. I'm going to use a smaller brush. I'm going to be using a square brush. I am going to use a little bit of my fluid. You can use water, as I said before. Please, please, please stay aware of if you are judging your work, how you're judging it. You should not be judging it at all. This is just sketching for sketching's sake. Finding a way to have fun with it and find something that is going to be interesting to you that you can maybe pursue, take a little bit further. So I'm going to do one more here. And now I'm going to deal, because I'm dealing with the paint, sort of painterly medium, I'm just going to apply. And I'm still thinking circle, geometric. But now I'm going to go the opposite way where I'm going to use some of this marking and go more on this path of dealing with space to develop line. And there's corrections that I need to make, some ideas that may come from one into the other. Maybe having to bring in a little bit of white paint in here. Now, hopefully today we're working at the level of absolute basic concept simplicity of, in terms of thought process, what we're dealing with, just line, shape, basic elements. But you could add a lot of context to whatever type of work you're beginning to deal with here. So you could begin to add narrative, and because of the shapes and lines and expression that you're using, it begins to have a meaning. Stay away from that. At least for today, stay away from that. You want to keep sort of that simplified, very basic elemental mindset. And I'm going to be adding some white paint here on this. Notice how, I started having a little gray shows up. And see right there, when I did this, a thought comes into my mind. So as I saw this first circle, and now as it comes together with the second circle, I begin to think of this thing as a union, sort of oh, look at that. Kind of like those wedding rings, two of them becoming one. Those kind of thoughts could be helpful, but at this moment, I want you to stay away from, that bunny, the cloud that looks like a bunny. It's helpful. It's imagination. It could be creative. Now it's becoming more of a figure 8. So beginning to deal with these thoughts that arise and how I'm going to just bring it back to line, shape, maybe texture, and feel like you're still in control. So not my cup of tea. Something here I would have to play way, way, way more with this. Maybe it's the medium that's a little bit constraining. It's too small for this brush and the kind of things that I would want to do. Maybe I should have done it with less space, meaning more of line work or gestural work could have been the solution there. I'm going to go to another one here, and I'm going to switch to ink. So I just have this India ink. It's actually Noodler's ink, water-based, permanent ink. You could use water-soluble inks. I'm going to use the same brush, and I'm going to go still geometric, but I'm going to go more somewhat in a linear. And again, my first mark, whatever first mark I make, is going to have a relationship to that second one. And that second one is going to invite a third one. So here I'm beginning to get a sense of vertical, horizontals that are barely touching. And this one just became split. And they're not symmetrical. They're kind of another word that comes up you could deal with. Pattern. So you could do patterns and begin to deal with that issue, that element of pattern or rhythm. And overall, the one that's in the hierarchy of dominance, what is the most important element here? Line, pattern, space, texture. There's one that really, really becomes powerful overall, and that's balance or harmony. You want this, unless you want to break balance and make it feel heavy and unbalanced. Well, in a way, you kind of still are dealing with balance, just in its the polarity of it, unbalanced. So I'm going to go into a little thicker variation of lines here. And these are all just lines. Geometric, I haven't dealt with one, even though some begin to read as shape. Just putting lines and kind of black rectangles here and there. Begin to, again, very unconscious, in a very unconscious way, very automatic way. Guide my hand, and I'm beginning to see how the space and the interaction of the shapes, and I'm keeping it very controlled. They're not gestural or expressive, but they could be. And I'm just going to go ahead and cross some of these lines and integrate them, creating more of a mesh and seeing what the surface is asking for, what this shape is asking for. This one up here is too lonely. Give it a little balance. And then that balance can demand, oh, now that's heavy. It needs to be balanced out over here. So putting them, arranging them. Let me do one more. And I do like this. I do like this way of sketching. I do it a lot, which is ink and brush. And I'm going to just go ahead and do one more geometric, but this time I'm going to try to be more expressive. So sort of a faster, somewhat gestural variation of stroke. And it could be very simplified. As long as you still maintain a sense of control. And it isn't very interesting because it's mental control. It's control over the subconscious. Somehow the fight between conscious and unconscious that you're witnessing, the battle, and how one is dominant and which is the one that works. For the most part, we're so just given to, no, it needs to be conscious, it needs to be, controlled, and it needs to be the way I want it, not allowing what sometimes could be considered as more true to show up. A little bit of juxtaposition. And there we have it. So there's my take on 4 geometric, just focused on geometric thoughts for sketches. I'm going to do one more page. And I'm going to do it in ink again. So I'm going to set this aside. Have another page ready. And I'm going to do the same thing. Split it into 4. And this time, we can go anywhere you want. Geometric, organic. I have one here that says letters. And I want to show you that one really quick. So I'm struggling. Just circles and triangles, that's not my thing. Organic, that's too broad, too general. How do I get there? So here's one. I could use somewhat script shapes of letters. So for example, my name, there's sort of an L. Now how big, how small? There's a U shape there. There's the I. There's the S. And I could just, without even thinking of why does it have to be my name? It could be overlap, so that's kind of like an eh. And it could just begin to not even resemble letters, just flow, overlap, fill up the space with a sense of kind of script. That's a great exercise. So let me do that again. In case you didn't see it, I would hope you take a quick pause and look. I'm going to start very, very obvious here. And I'm just going to go ahead and do the letter A that then is followed by somewhat, if you could see it, the letter S there. And I'm going to do somewhat like a letter C. And obviously the letter O, kind of squiggly O comes in there. That then is just overlapped by somewhat of a letter M. And you could see how this, even if it's more controlled, can become something that begins to look more organic. You could try to do, let's do one where I'm going to do all letters. See if you can tell which one's which without lifting the brush. So I'm going to load it up with lots of ink, and I'm going to start here. And I'm just going to continue as if, until I run out of ink, as if I'm just writing words almost. And now the direction of those words, am I doing them upside down? Oh, yep, that was upside down. Can I do upside down letters? Now you're beginning to look into the unconscious, because there's no way your left brain can make sense of that. And I'm going to begin to add some dashes to it. But this begins to look like a series already, like, okay. And this is some of the abstract work that I do actually use. Let me do one last one. Maybe keep it a little smaller. I want those letters to have somewhat of a, and I say letters, when in fact it's more like just shapes that kind of begin to look like letters. And obviously, look at how I'm dealing with the space between them and the overlap. And you could have one where they don't even touch. So you could have lines that go in and around as you fill up the space. So this one just comes really easy to me. You could tell that was really fast. And within this, you begin to find things. Kind of wishing I did something different here, which would have been this. And I'm just going to go over this one here, the first one here, which is the opposite, using negative space, now that I have some of those letters there, to just fill up some of these areas and have the opposite effect of enhancing the quality of the line by darkening. So you see what I'm doing? Where there was line, I'm just filling up the space. And the texture would come to play huge. The technique and textures that I would be applying here. But notice how immediately it takes us somewhere else. And you want to be thinking, if you know the name, not that he did anything like this, but if you're familiar with Jackson Pollock and how that paint was just stripped, it was somewhat in a, I mean, he did use sticks almost as if he was, in a way, kind of writing the paint on. He was literally dancing it on. Always had music, Native American music and jazz, which is a great way to get there very, very easily. Instead of having to listen to me with some music, and that music is automatically going to shut down parts of your left brain, allowing you to just get into the rhythm. And it's also going to generate sort of a sense of feeling, so upbeat or jazzy or dramatic. So I would suggest opera, maybe. It could work. Could be interesting. Finally, I want to do one last one. And we're going to have to get to work very quick here. And that's going to be the gestural. And I kind of did somewhat. So I'm just going to do one on this whole page instead of 4. I'm going to go into a little bit of a bigger brush. Still with ink. Again, you could be doing this with pencil, color pencil, charcoal, you name it. The medium that you find easier to sketch these with, but just pencil and paper will do the trick. And it starts getting you there. So when I mean gestural, I mean there's going to be elbow and shoulder, maybe even hip action in some of these marks. Some, I used the word earlier, energy, whether it reaches the level of aggression. You can begin to use all these different verbs, you know, stabbing, rubbing, dragging, splashing. Let's see, what else? What other verb can I think of? Pushing. Sweeping. I love this one. Caressing. And just like that, we have great gesture here. I'm going to make that black paint by mixing 50% blue, and I'm using ultramarine blue, and 50% burnt umber. And you want to do this with your palette knife, do it thoroughly, and immediately you see that black coming in. Now the question is, why does this How does blue and brown make black? Well, the truth is that burnt umber has yellow and red in it. And when you mix all three primary colors, what you're going to get is a dark gray or black. And I can show you right now, hopefully you could see with the lighting, that this is getting to a level that reads black, but it's different from the blacks that you would generally buy kind of pre-mixed. There we have it. And if I were to apply this to the canvas, there it is. You could see it's black. If it mixes with a little bit of white, it's going to be a difference. And the reason why I do that is, you know, most of the black, there is blue, and I want to control how much blue is in my grays as I apply my black. That's the reason why you would do this. So having that ready, I'm going to go ahead and use white. So I'm just going to grab a chunk, set it on my palette. And what I wanted to show you today is, as I'm thinking of line, shape. I'm thinking of, in a way, I want to focus more on the feel. We were talking about that. How I want this painting to come about, and more about how I feel as I'm drawing or painting those lines, shapes on there. Somehow, I can't get away from that text, organic way of working. So it's basically this one here, somewhere here. I should experiment and go somewhere more geometric. So it is open to you. It's your choice. And I'm going to give you those, again, just using black and white, geometric, organic, or script, meaning sort of a letter flow type of gesture. And I'm going to start, you could do this in so many different ways. The first one I'm going to do is, I'm going to make a decision whether my background is going to be more white or more black. And I'm feeling it's going to be more white with the lines of black. So what kind of medium would I want to add? And I'm going to do 2 different takes. Now, if you don't have this, this is fine. I'm just showing because I like to maybe open up a chance that you will eventually say, hey, that looks interesting. I'm going to test it out and look into different mediums as an acrylic painter. You're going to want to do this eventually. Now, this you could also do with oil paints, by the way. They have the pretty much the oils or the thinners that will make your paint much looser, watery, or thicker, pastier, impasto-like. So what I want to do is take some of this black paint. And for today, I think I'm going to use both blacks. So this one that I mixed, and I'll use a different one. So for example, this Mars black or ivory black. And for this one, I'm going to use Liquitex, and this one's called String Gel. So it gives it this very stringy application, and you will see it right away. This is what it looks like. You could actually just pour right onto the palette. So if you see that, here it comes, and it just I want to give you sort of a, it's thicker than honey, but very close. And you can see how that's happening there. And as I do that, I kind of went 50-50. So I have the same amount of gel as I do pigment, and it really, really extends it. So it's going to make it thicker, just a bit, but it's going to give it that flow, this consistency. So we're dealing with that. changing a little bit the gloss of it because it does become glossier. I'm sure there's a matte string gel. And the other option would be the liquid, the thickening gel. So you want to maintain your area kind of clean. I'm also making a quick decision because this will also make the paint dry a little bit faster. Anytime you use a medium, unless it's a slow drying medium, every other medium with acrylics is going to dry your paints just a little bit faster. And there we have it. So notice that I have kind of a doubling, but the color did not, it didn't get lighter, it didn't modify it as much as you would expect. There we go. Now, how am I going to apply this paint onto the canvas? That's the fun part. I want this, in a way, I might switch over to a round brush. And I'm going to want to see if as I look for that unconscious sort of state of mental process here, I'm looking for that organic script-like shape. Very, very intuitive. My thought process right now, thinking of the overall, I'm beginning to develop one shape here that will eventually kind of begin to show me the path, the way. But what I do want is this to get that thickness. I am thinking just a little bit in terms of shapes of letters, but pushing it just a little bit further to a more sort of organic finish. Now I'm beginning to see two shapes develop here, kind of independent, almost coming together, actually touching. And you could almost see this as a letter S. I still see it as just a curved shape that is going to somehow, the decision, the process of making decisions, how close to the edge do I come? Do I go all the way to the edge? Do I go off the edge? Closing out that shape that maybe kind of patterns and repeats right up here at the corner. And would that have been different if it was the opposite direction? Does that element need to repeat? Maybe a little bit bigger, not thicker, just further from the corner on the opposite. So adding a little bit of symmetry. And sometimes there's a little bit of gap in between the line. So notice that I'm beginning to deal with the tension between this element, this shape, and how they come very close and actually touch right between these. So I'm going to use that again between these right down here, as this follows and just disappears also right off the edge once again. So there begins to be sort of a wrapping effect, and it continues to guide me. This here, is it working for me? I'm going to close it out as an individual shape there that becomes just a little more organic. The way I'm picking up that mix of acrylic and gel, and the way I'm coming close into these shapes and see the application. So I'm kind of dropping and dragging it and just letting it string along. But I want that thickness. Can you see the thickness? Some of them even dabs up, and it's sort of kind of tubular. There's sort of this rounding feel to some of these lines. So kind of definitely volume. I don't want to think in terms of like mountain range like, but there's definitely thickness, a three-dimensional value to it, not losing track of what I think for me primarily is going to be the shape of them. Some of them getting a little bit thicker, a little bit taller. So I hope you could see, like right here, how much taller this area is going to get. So it's getting thicker and taller in terms of how that line comes together. Now, if you're feeling lost, like, I don't know what I'm doing, get rid of that thought and just go for a walk and just paint kind of, I don't want to tell you what to do, but as if you were mapping out, tracing your steps, just as if you walk up, down, and curve around, bringing it together. Actually, this is becoming something that's dealing with edges. So as you can see here, I'm coming off this, and this edge over here. So I don't want to do too much of that. How much of it and how well it will read is going to be now one of those elements. So we're going a little bit beyond lined. Now we can begin to see shapes. Somewhat, I'm really trying to stay away from developing any type of read into shapes. Just thickening some of these areas. I'm going to go really close to the edge here, but not touch it. The interaction between elements. In a way, you're kind of creating a world where these either get along or don't. And you're in charge of hopefully making everything work well with everything else. And that is the challenge. Kind of creating a utopia where every mark, every element complements, enhances, and is enhanced by everything else. And more importantly, is evident as you just look at it. You don't have to explain it. It's just there. Like a sunrise, like a sunset. You take it in. Wow. What is it? Oh, well, it's the quality of the violet light that, no, not needed. You just look at it and take it in. There's no need to explain it. Sometimes you can point things out. Oh, look how the sun is going through. And then you realize, well, I didn't even need to say that. It's obvious. You know, how the light plays through the clouds and how it just, we could see it. And that's what we're trying to do here. Put elements, very simple. Remember, just line or shape. You could develop a bit further into form. You could actually just go for letters, symbols. Notice here I'm doing sort of a cross or X that will stand out to some. Like, that means something. Well, no, it doesn't. It just balances out this space here. And when I bring this element, which is just a dot, and this element, It creates sort of a play. We get to one of the more important parts. And this is any and every single time you deal with art making. And that is, when is it done? Am I somewhere near finished? Does it need more? I always use the metaphor of cooking. You know when it's undercooked, they'll tell you. You'll know it. You know when it's overcooked. And somehow we realize that's right. That's it right there. Either by smell, because we timed it, the recipe tells us. You just know it. Here you got to get to that level where there it is. It's done. It's not undercooked. It's not overcooked. It's just right. How do you do that? Well, there's a lot of things happening. It's when you begin to lose control, balance, when you're sometimes overcompensating. I also like to think of it as when you need to say something. You have to ask yourself, what am I trying to say here? And how long do I have to talk to explain what I'm trying to say? You could say it very simply, very clear, or you could talk for 2 hours and get nowhere. And, blame the other person for not understanding what you're trying to say. So it's the clarity of message, words that you need to use to explain that message. Same here. You're using lines, shapes to convey something you want to say. Now, do we have to know what we're trying to say? Because at the same time, we're looking at these elements and I'm letting them tell me how this is all working out here. And so I have to listen. It's not just saying, it's listening. And some would say that's more important. And I agree. Now, how open and how well are we to listening? It'll show. If I didn't listen to this telling me it's ready, it's done, and I go past it and overcook it, that means I wasn't listening. And I hope this is making sense. It's one of those things that the understanding of it comes by doing. I'm just going to add this little bit of paint there with texture. And kind of have it circle and just break the shape right there. Just dealing with this inner space. Now I have something here interesting and some open space. So now I'm dabbling with, it needs a little more salt, and it's at a very careful stage where it could go, a little too salty now. And as a chef, I'm not a chef, you need to be cautious. You need to know how to handle the ingredients. So I'm going to be done with this black here. This is it. These are my elements. I want to show you something else now. So I used just one brush, and it was this medium size round brush. I thought I was in the beginning. I'll tell you my thought process. Okay, I'm going to go with bigger brush and then work down to smaller, thinner lines. It wasn't necessary. It would be one of those things that, why are you adding that extra flavor to this soup? It's just too much. It's sometimes less is more. Most of the time, less is more. And more direct and clear is always better. So what I'm going to do here is just switch over to the white. And I have this white paint here. And what I want to demo next is this other medium here. So I'm going to fill in this white area with white brush strokes, but I'm going to show you this natural sand texture gel. And again, this is one of many, many options. I'm not saying go get this. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just showing you so you can see how automatic texture sometimes can come in handy if that's what you're looking for in your painting. So it looks like this. This is almost, you know, like one of those creams. You can actually, when I dig in to grab some, you can, I'm going to put it here next to the microphone so you could hear the sound. There's actual sand in there. I don't know if you could hear that. It's really crunchy. So I'm grabbing a generous amount here. 50-50 right into the paint. And I'm going to go heavy on this. So I'm grabbing a little more. And then as a student, I found out you don't need to buy this really. You need the polymer, and you actually go get some sand from a playground or something. And wow, people go crazy when they look at your painting. How did you do that? And they want to touch it. And you have to keep telling them, yeah, go ahead, touch it. And it's not just sand. It could be, as long as it's, it could be organic. And what I mean is, as long as it doesn't rot, you could put it in there. So if you could see the consistency of this, that as I spread it, you could see there's that sand texture on it. I would generally want to let this dry. That way I could get really close, get in there, and not have to be so careful. So I'm just removing some of that off my palette knife just to save that extra. And one thought that I'm having is, I don't have to do this all over. I could do it in specific areas where it will call out more focus, more attention to it. And I'm going to start off with that. So I'm definitely going to start over here. Look how heavy I'm going. I'm going right on. Very thick. Just give me 1 second. There we are. So you could see here how thick that is. And at the same time, just going back 1 second here. Nope, not working. There we go. Sorry about that. 1 second here. I want to show you this. There we are. So as I move in here, you could see the texture, and it already has. I showed you that that paint and that gel medium, the texture, the sand, has texture in it, but I could also add more texture to it with my brush stroke. So as I dab or drag, I could try to polish that look, or I can make it even stand out more, way more textured. How close I'm going to move into the lines. I really want a contrast of the glossiness of that line with this grittiness. And I could even leave some of the background showing just a little bit. Now question, what happens when you add that gel texture and then you add a little more water? Well, it will water it down, and it will also play with the level of thickness of that texture. It will remove a little bit of it. It will thin it down. But you can actually do that. And I've seen that done really, really beautifully. So all the variables of all the things that come into play begin to apply here. So we went from line to shapes to forms, dealing with space And now we're dealing with all these application techniques and textures. All of these things are still relevant. How am I managing my line? How am I managing the space between my lines? And at this point, it just gets really fun. I'm just picking up paint and going for it all the way around this shape. So I'm beginning to take more confidence in the, I know where to go. I know how to play with that texture. I know the feel, the final look. I'm beginning to see it. So it's like you're going on vacation and you're getting there. You're almost there. You can feel it. Now you know. You can start seeing the landmarks that, okay, we're close. Which before I really couldn't tell you. Had an idea in my head. As I began developing it, you could kind of begin to see it, but then it pointed you to somewhere else. It comes together, and then here we are at the finish line, beginning to see. And we're still open to, what if I shifted some of this and that? It is dangerous. You're always taking bigger risks when you're doing that at the end of a work, because you maybe forces you to readjust and rearrange elements that are set, that are working, that you could easily, once again, overcook. Now I know it's hard to see with the camera angle here, but you could see the difference in texture there in this entire area. I hope it shows. And it's just going to be that. I could let this dry and come over adding more texture to it. And that would be a beautiful, almost that white on white painting that I showed you last. And have it work. Now for some of these areas, I'm definitely going to want to move to a smaller brush and work with a little bit more patience. Just a little more patience. With smaller dabs as I get into smaller and smaller areas and still maintain a consistency. With the application of the texture. And when this dries, it's going to be beautiful. It's going to be really beautiful. So I'm dealing with the contrast of the thickness of the shape, the lines that are really trying to be shapes, and how the space around it kind of constricts that. Also, in terms of the look, the gloss versus the dry, gritty texture that's being applied all the way around it. So if I started here and I'm going in, now I'm going in here, where does it end? I'm going to leave some areas open. I'm going to saturate some of these smaller spaces so it balances that out. Being careful not to overdo it. So I hope you get a good sense of where I'm going. Now this is going to take a little extra while, a little bit of maybe drying time and coming back to revisit certain areas. Like I mentioned, with a smaller brush. Sometimes I really recommend stepping away if the techniques allows you to. I don't want you to step away when you needed to add a layer before it dried, that kind of thing. But stepping away, giving it a little time and space in order for it to be able, so you can listen, so it has a chance to speak to you. And it will be different now, an hour from now, than now. Right now, you're too in it. But if you give it, let's say, 10 minutes, 15, 20 minutes, an hour, or even a day, and you come back, it's called fresh eyes. You're going to see it with brand new, fresh eyes, and you're going to see things you were not able to see right now. And there are painters famous for holding onto a painting for years just looking at it, watching it, setting it aside. Months and months go by. They look at it again and they go, oh, wow, okay, something new. Still not touch it or touch it here and there. Give it even more time. And years pass until they're ready to, got it. I hear you. And then finish it. And it sounds kind of, that's crazy. But it makes sense. Some of these ideas, the way they happen, the way they develop, as you gain more and more experience, you'll have those answers sooner, right at that moment, when you need it. Other times you need to give it a time to grow. And there we are. So as we continue finishing our painting, I'm looking at the clock, and I do want to have a chance to see what you were working on. So I look forward to week 2, where we will be taking this just one step further, adding one level of complexity, adding color. And we're going to add one more color to this scheme, where now it's going to become monochromatic, and it's going to get really, really light, really, really dark, and we're going to play with all of that. So mostly value of a color, and still take this maybe even a little further. Maybe even do this into part 2. Or switch it over to, you know what, week 1 I did somewhat organic, linear. I'm going to go geometric and 3D maybe. So that will be week 2. And I hope you enjoyed it.